Welcome, low ego action heroes. This is Debbie Levitt from Delta CX, and welcome to episode 241 Diary Studies with special guest David Snodgrass, who will join us in a moment. And first of all, as always, thanks to everybody in our Patreon who makes these shows possible. Thanks to our paid members who you see on the screen and our free members as well. We are up to 300 members in the Patreon, and about a third are paying. So the paid members know things first, and the free members know things second. And guess what? There's no algorithms between you and me. That is my dream because I have 40,000 followers on LinkedIn, and when I post to LinkedIn, 63 people are shown a thing. So please come join the Patreon, even at the free level, so we don't have algorithms between us anymore. So check it out, patreon.com/CXCC. So with that being said, I'm going to bring in our super guest who has been on the show, years ago during the pandemic, during the famous show where my USB hub died and I had to call in as my own guest. David, welcome back. Tell us all about you.
Thanks, Debbie. I've been doing UX since before it was cool to call it that. So for a minute, right? Everybody's like, "What is it called? What's it called?" I'm like, I remember when it wasn't. Nobody knew what it was called. So all these titles, that's great. Whatever, call it whatever. I don't care. I can hung on those. Yeah, I live in Ohio. I do UX work. I love doing UX work. I do a little less design now. I do a lot more strategy, trying to figure out how much research we should do and what kind of methods we should do. Do a lot of that. Do some design system work. I've been really fortunate in my career to work on some really, really cool projects, have some really, really big impacts. Just being in the right place at the right time a lot of times with the right teams. So I'm happy to be here. And I think I was commenting on something on Slack about diary studies, and you're like, "Hey, you should do a show about diary studies." And then I was like, "Well, I haven't done diary studies really in a long time. I did one not that long ago, relatively speaking, but the rest of them were from the early days." So I was like, "Oh, well, I'll give it a shot, see what I remember." And then I started remembering things as I thought about it more. So it's good that I had some time to jog my memory.
Yeah, and let's start with the easy question, which is, what is a diary study?
Diary study. Well, really to define it succinctly, it's where the user is going to, or customer or guest or whatever you want to call them. I don't care. I'm going to use the word user throughout the show. If people get offended, I'm sorry. It's just a handy word. I got to have a word. It's where the user is going to log what they're doing, how they're feeling, why they're doing it. Sometimes while they're doing the action, sometimes after. It's really a little bit, you really can't control that part of it. We used to do it with notebooks. We'd send notebooks and instructions to people, and they would do it. Those were the first ones that I did for on-prem software companies. That was one of the early niches that my boutique agency had way that back then, and they wanted us to help them make their apps, their on-prem software more efficient, mostly project management and claim management software. So it was really, really straight line workflows, but they wanted us to make it more usable so that their clients would be more efficient, right? Their clients, users would be more efficient, but we couldn't actually talk to the users. So we came up with this idea. We do diary studies. So I went down and I bought some composition notebooks, a big stack of them, some manila envelopes, and we mailed them a whole bunch out. And we did some interesting things with anonymization, so that across their client base, we sent out 20, but we told one from each company in their instruction pack not to do it, to send it back empty, and everybody had picked their own code names, so they didn't actually know, the companies wouldn't actually know who had given what feedback, and that because there was one person that was kind of kept out of it, right? But they didn't know for sure which one it was. So there was a little bit of obfuscation in there. We had to be tricky to get people to give us honest feedback, right? Because these companies had certain ways that they wanted to use the software, and they wanted their people to parrot those same things, all that complexity that gets in the way. And then we'd get them back, and then the real work began, right? You'd get 2 or 3 notebooks or more worth of stuff, and people dialogue, basically giving their internal monologue as they're using the software, and you'd have to put it all together. And it was much like sticky notes and stickers now, except we used index cards because we had to write bigger chunks of text down to take with us. We had little sticky tabs that we would put in the notebooks. It was really when you look back on it now, it seems like really, low tech, but that's what we had to do. And then we, distill that all into themes. And after that, it becomes probably more similar to people distilling into themes. What's actionable? What can they actually use, and all those things. And then we'd give those back to our clients, and then probably never ever hear what happened, because on-prem software, they don't push out updates in real time, right? Like, so it would be like a whole year or two sometimes before the what we worked on would get installed at that client site, right? And so, by then everybody had forgotten our names. So sort of.
Oh, the old stories. So let's talk a little bit about thinking more modernly, since you're not sending
Yeah.
out notebooks nowadays with most diary studies. Can you think of some times or situations or scenarios where a diary study might be an okay choice?
Yeah, I can tell you one example was where I was at. They had they had an order entry tool that the UX team before I had got there had taken a couple of swings at fixing. And I really didn't think sending more user experience folks down there to do interviews was going to help. Just they'd done it twice. They hadn't moved the needle. So I said, hey, we're just going to install Look Back, and we're gonna make sure these people have microphones. We didn't put them on camera. That was beyond the capabilities of their computers, believe it or not. And just said, hey, we're going to record their screen, and we're going to record what they're doing for like 2 hours for a certain number of people across a certain number of functions. And we picked, an intermediate user, a pretty novice user, and then a hyper experienced power user, right? We picked one from each of those groups. And we were only limited by our ability to tolerate watching the videos, right? That was pretty much it. So we were planning on having about 40 hours, I think, of total, or no, about 24 hours of footage to watch. We ended up getting almost 50. And so I had brought a consultant in, kind of a younger UX researcher, to watch these things. And I think he watched it twice, and he did not like space it. He like power watched it. I think with some scotch. I'm not going to lie. I think there was some scotch, but he did a great job of transcribing everything down. I mean, it's dry. I mean, it's dry. I watched it once just to double check him, but it was rough. And then we just went through and we discovered all the issues. It's. I think sometimes we forget that, because we get so enthralled with the personal interaction, that our first choice should try to be observation whenever we can, because observation gives us a true glimmer of what's happening, right? And it's less biased, right? Because we're not there, we're not asking them questions, we're not getting them out of their flow. This was kind of a perfect example of that. Users have this, when you're talking about a piece of software, they'll limit their feedback to that piece of software, right? So you have to ask them process questions, and if you're not really skilled in user research, you might miss some things, right? So that's what happened here. They had asked questions about the software, and the software was terrible. Don't get me wrong. Like, it was really bad. But the real problem was that the users were going to look up on the websites, these two websites, external facing websites, in a wiki, their product information that they had to use to enter the orders into the system. And before you say, well, they should have just used the online ordering portal, the customers could have. One, they didn't want to. And two, the online ordering portals were so clunky, right? And there were so many different options to choose from. It was so intricate that the customers actually preferred faxing it in or calling in their order, right? Because it was so difficult to place the order, because there's so many options, and they depended on each other and all of those things. And it was on my team's roadmap to rebuild that, but it was down our roadmap by like probably 2 years at that time. It was way off in the distance. And so what we discovered was this was the problem. It was taking them an average of 15 to 20 minutes to look up a product. We had an overseas team that did the simpler orders, and they were on dial-up, and it was taking them twice as long, because a lot of the images were print ready, were like print images, so that they could see all the detail and print them out on their color printer in their office, so they could show their clients, right, these these things that before they bought them. And so that was the problem. And so we never designed a pixel. A developer took all of their product data, dumped it all into one database, cleaned up the images, and created a little web-based widget that they could look up their products on, and it immediately solved the problem. What was the real business impact? Well, every year when they go into their busy time, this was invitations, custom greeting cards that corporations do. They had to hire up almost double the size of their team to handle their busy season. And they had it because the order entry system was so clunky. They had to hire them up about 2 to 3 months in advance. So it ended up being like 6 months of payroll for this extra group of people. And because we made this all more efficient, they didn't have to do that again. So it was really interesting. So when would I use diary studies? When I want to get well, this was great because it was like a virtual diary study, so I could really get true observation. If I want to get in someone's head without necessarily biasing them or try to catch them in the moment, right? At least hoping that they'll capture something down. In our modern age, there's so many more options for like a video virtual diary study or like an audio one. Just having users capture audio notes um, also makes the distillation a lot easier because now you've got transcripts that you can pull from, and you're not reading through notebooks and pulling out index cards, right? There's software that can help you do that now. And then AI is not everything, but AI can do some pattern recognition and some theming, and can help you just do some high level verbal distillation around certain words that maybe you're looking for. It's not awesome, but I've been doing that a little bit recently with some of our other research, and it's helpful in like going through walls and walls of text if you're looking for certain words and things like that. It can be helpful, but I wouldn't rely on it as my sole way of going through that right now.
Yeah, thanks for all that. I wanted to jump in with a diary study story of my own, especially if we don't have any questions from anybody yet. And I was a freelancer for someone else's agency a few years ago, and we had a client that made an app that came pre installed on certain cell phones. It was just certain models. They'd had a partnership with these companies. It came pre installed on those phones, but not on other phones. And you couldn't go to the store and, the Google Play Store and download the app. So either you had it or you didn't. And they really hadn't been studying. How's our app doing? Yeah, it comes pre installed on a phone, so you're kind of stuck with it, but does anybody use it? Does anybody like it? What could be better about it? Is it working for anybody? They didn't have a lot of data around that. They had just kind of made it and got the partnerships and put it out there. So, this is obviously something that, as much as possible, we wanted to observe, but the app revolved around a lot of looking at news and headlines. And so we figured it wouldn't necessarily make sense to say to people, okay, share your screen, show us your news and headlines, give us some impressions, or asking them some questions, and then that's it. We never talk to these people again. So what we asked them to do, even if they'd never used the app before and didn't even notice it was on their phone, was I think we asked them to please go into it 3 times a day for 5 days, just to get different impressions of it at different times when it's showing them different news or headlines or stories. And that way, yes, in some ways it was a little unnatural in that we might have been asking people to use a thing that they hadn't been using, but at least then we could get some feedback from some people who had been using it on their phones and some people who hadn't been using it on their phones. And so we set it up for 5 days, 3 times a day, and we said, you pick the times, roughly morning, roughly midday, roughly evening or night, and we gave them a way to type something into us. But as David was saying, we also gave them a way to either record a voice recording to us or to even send us a video of them talking about it. And so that way we could also have, as David mentioned, the things that make great video clips later. Here's 6 people talking about how the news wasn't relevant to them, or here's 4 people talking about how the app was hard to use, or here's 6 people talking about why they never use this app in the past, and they're trying it for the first time. So the video clips and audio clips are great for bringing some of that stuff to light. Again, diary study is not my preferred method. I've done this very rarely in my career. I'm definitely more of an observations and interviews person, but sometimes you're trying to take a look at something that doesn't happen in one discrete time or one visit or one session. Like if we think about trying to study how do people shop for a car, that doesn't just happen once, and it doesn't necessarily happen just online. There's going to be lots of different interactions and touch points online, talking to friends, going to dealerships, maybe social posts, and a diary study is going to capture more of that. Now, as Larry Marine likes to point out, and we shouldn't forget the voice of Larry, even though he might not be watching us today, Disruptive Research Book, and that is that remember, you are still at the mercy of your participants. And David, I'll ask you about this in a moment. If you what drawbacks you see to diary studies, and a story you might have related to that. But Larry reminds us that even if we're asking people to fill out something in a notebook or type something online or leave us a voice message, it's usually happening after they did whatever it was. And we're asking them to remember what they just did. And even if they just did it, not everybody remembers every step they took or some of the things they were thinking around it or some of the things that went well or badly. So you're really relying on people's memories. You're relying on them to include steps that we think are important that they might think are unimportant. And so there are some downsides to diary studies. You shouldn't expect to capture everything. It's going to suffer from anything that a self-reporting method might suffer from. David,
Yeah.
something to add to that?
Yeah, when we did the old notebook diary studies, they had to take down when they did the activity and then when they recorded it. And the further they were, the less weight we put on that feedback, right? Because we knew memory would be a little bit, it could be a slippery slope there. That was the good thing about doing the virtual diary studying, is because they were literally narrating as they worked, right? You still are you're still relying on them to narrate everything that they're thinking, feeling, doing, right? Luckily, we had some talkative individuals when we were doing that. So that helped a lot, right? They were very talkative. They gave us double the amount that we needed. One of the other simple diary studies that we've kind of launched within the company I'm with now is just comparative research. So we've kind of empowered everybody in the company. We haven't gotten a lot of bites yet to do, we had one guy, designer on our team, who just bought a new house. So he went out to shop furniture. We consider furniture kind of a comparative experience, right? It's got add-on, it's got some additional financing, it's got additional insurance and protection options, and it's kind of a big ticket purchase, right? So you kind of do some, some thinking about it, and there's some preference to it. So did a download session after the fact and learned some things about how he felt during that experience to parallel to our experience, right? And to see if all of these type buying situations that are similar to ours are just uncomfortable, right? Are there anybody that's figured it out? So that's kind of an interesting little diary study that we did. That was, you're right, it was post, right? They weren't narrating it as they went, although some people took notes. We encouraged them to kind of be in the moment. But that was another one that we did that was kind of interesting. But yeah, you're totally at the mercy of our participants. Diary studies pair best with when you can follow up and ask questions and do kind of more digging research. Some in the circumstance I opened up with, that wasn't possible for us. We weren't even allowed to really know who they were, both for them and for us. But there was some there were some things that came out that were more questions than answers, which I think, good research tends to do. It tends to generate more questions than answers, depending on what your goal is. There's always side things that you want to know.
Yeah, and I want to jump in and talk a little bit about tools. There are definitely some tools out there that are designed for doing diary studies, or at least they'll tell you these tools are for diary studies. The one where we had the people using the phone app, I had come up with the idea, and you can agree with it or disagree with it. I didn't want to use one of the traditional diary study tools. I wanted to try something a little bit different. And so we actually used Video Ask. Now, this is not sponsored. We paid them them. They don't pay me. I don't even use them anymore. But we used Video Ask at the time, and Video Ask is kind of a sub company or a side project of the people at Typeform. So I think some of you know Typeform, the survey company. And what Video Ask does is you can create these, it's kind of like a survey, except it starts with a video. And then people can respond to you to that question by typing or speaking or videoing. And you can make this little workflow where at each different point they have to put in their name, or maybe if they're anonymized, a participant number. And then they have to put in, maybe they type something. Maybe we give them the option of, do you want to add voice or video to it? So you can make these neat little workflows, and then you end up with all of the things people typed or the things that people left in more of a media, audio or video form. And so while I can't say it's the perfect diary study tool because it's not intended for that, it was certainly not badly priced for what we were trying to do. And I think we had 20 people doing this for a week. And so we ended up with, I don't remember how many videos we ended up with, but we had a good amount of data to give back to the client. And so that was a tool that we tried out that we thought was an interesting alternative to, certainly to composition notebooks. David, what about you? Any tools you specifically liked or didn't like?
I like to look back a lot for what it gave us, the ability to watch their screen and hear them narrate. Right, that was super helpful. I wish we could have seen their faces too, but like I said, their computers just couldn't handle the cameras. They couldn't handle webcams. That's how bad those computers were. And so I really like that tool. I would, if it was an audio only, I would probably look at like an audio only specific tool that we could record into. Look back's a little pricey for something like that, right? Like look back's great if you're trying to get the screen recording too, but if we didn't need that, I know where I'm at now. We kind of looked at building our own little app for our internal, right, like our own little, quick HTML, CSS, JavaScript app that was backed by Google Forms or something, and we didn't have time to do it. But it's something like that where it could be interesting. Yeah, I don't really have any other software recommendations. I haven't really dug deeply into what kind of software is out there for diary studies. Again, they're not something I do very often. I know that we're looking to do them as part of our journey mapping work, but we don't have the bandwidth for a full end-to-end journey, nationwide journey mapping stuff. So we're bringing in a third party to do that work. So I think so. It just is what it is. But yeah, I mean, I'll definitely look at Video Ask and anything anybody else has used in the chat. If you're anything like that, I love to keep up on tools and dig around a little bit.
Yeah, we only have a few live watchers today. So Melanie's, oh, great. Melanie's got a question. Melanie says, in today's business environment, which prioritizes speed overall and where resources are so limited, are diary studies even relevant? David, you want to take that one first before I chime in?
Well, I'm going to say it depends, right? Because that's the first answer always. That's like all of the above. It depends. So absolutely, I don't. It depends. I think I think when you're talking about getting close to certainty, a diary study probably isn't helping you, right? You doing diary studies for usability, like we had to do many years ago in the on-prem solution scenario that I talked about, it isn't very useful, right? It's a lot of work. If you're trying to discover how your customer thinks and feels in a moment, can be very helpful. Can be far more. It gets you out of their space. The more we're there, the more we bias, right? So, can you get a company to sign off on doing one? That's a whole other question, right? It really depends, again, what you're trying to learn and how you're trying to do it. I look at diary studies as foundational things that you do when you're trying to set your experience principles in a market that doesn't exist yet, in a brand new market, or when you're trying to understand, or when you're trying to enter a very competitive market and you're trying to understand how and why you'd be different or where you could find a differentiation. But again, those are tough sells to startups. Diary studies and startups kind of, I don't want to say they're antithesis, but they're not going to like waiting.
Yeah, that's a great point there. I would say to my answer to Melanie's question would be that diary studies are definitely not my go to technique, but I think if I had something that was maybe closer to service design or something that needed to look at a process over a longer period of time, we always wish that we could be standing over people's shoulders and looking over them as they shop in a supermarket or make a decision about a certain item, or a procurement specialist is choosing a project management system, but we just can't be over their shoulder and we can't get into an interview or observation with them every time that they are thinking about this topic or researching it or discussing it with someone or deciding the budget or making a decision. So when you think about that journey map or what might also end up a service blueprint, there's so many steps and so many touch points, and we wish we could be the angel flying over their shoulder for each of those. And I think in a case like that, sure, we might still want to do some observations and some interviews or conversations, but the diary study could add data that is hard to get over that long period of time. But of course, we do have to pay the correct incentive to have someone involved in our study for what might be days or weeks. We're going to have the bandwidth, as David pointed out earlier, to deal with all of that data, especially if we're getting in videos and other things. And I don't think AI is totally there yet to help us analyze or synthesize these things. We're probably going to have to watch all of it and make some good notes. So I think that our diary studies relevant. I think they're not necessarily everybody's go-to, but I think where you have a longer arc of a customer journey, a customer process, a customer decision, a customer behavior or pattern, I think it can be something to add to the arsenal.
Yeah.
David, something to add to that?
I definitely don't think there's something you should do as a brand new UX researcher. I don't. I think you need. It requires a level of understanding and discernment that I think experience gets you from doing user interviews, listening to what they say, understanding what questions are coming out of that, right? I think that's a big part of it. So I wouldn't, if I was a newly minted UX researcher, I wouldn't run into my boss's office right now and be like, "Hey, let's do some diary studies." Right? No, I would not. I would not do that. I would think it's the right tool for the job scenario, right? And so it really is about, I want to know, like Debbie was saying, I want to know what a user, customer, guest is feeling over time in different situations repetitively. I always dreamed at Express we had this great customer panel that was our part of our rewards program, and I would have loved to have them doing continuous diary studies. I didn't have the manpower to the people power to ingest all of that information. But as
Right.
part of a continuous discovery, know where you're falling short, or maybe not falling short, or maybe digging deeper on things that you're listening for social. Right, you're doing some social listening and you're hearing some things, and then digging into your most loyal customers to say, "Hey, are you feeling that? Are you seeing that? Right? Like, what is that?" And doing that in a way that like would be interesting. I don't know, just things like that. As I think about like where could you really take that and put it to use? But again, right tool for the job. You don't want to stretch a tool into the wrong job.
Yeah, great points. And when I think about other things that could make interesting diary studies, I think about, look, I can run an observational and conversational session with someone about something like applying for jobs. But when you think about it, you don't apply for a job for a few minutes and then it's not something you do for a while. Somebody who's on the job hunt could be applying for jobs multiple times, multiple days, and if you really want to understand that person's experience with some depth, then a diary study could augment. That's the gong to remind us to wind up. The diary study could be augmenting what we're doing, the conversations we're having, and other observational things, because then we can see how does the user process, and let's say it's applying for jobs, how do they approach it? Does it change over time? How do they make different decisions? What are they doing in different types of scenarios? And try to get more deeply into problems and pain points and behaviors over these longer periods of time. So since the gong has sounded and we've hit our half hour and we should look at winding up, David, any last things you want to say about diary studies, and also where can we find you and follow you?
Yeah, I think the last thing I'll say is one of the interesting things about diary studies that's really hard to get anywhere else is you can get the thoughts and feelings from between the activities. Like Debbie, you were talking about the job hunt. You can get to that non when you're talking about job hunt, you're immediately putting somebody in a context of I'm applying for jobs. I'm, reading through job descriptions. I'm doing this action, but really what you might be interested in or what you might find out is that there's times between those. What does it feel like when you've been rejected 3 times and then you need to go dig in and apply for jobs? How does that feel? Maybe that's an opportunity that your app can fix. Um, you can find me at davidsnodgrass.us. I'm updating my website here soon. It's going to be pretty cool. I've got some really neat stuff. I've been showing it around to different people in the industry just kind of to get some feedback. It's kind of fun. It's going to be fun. So we're going to launch that. And then you can find me at in LinkedIn. It's under / super creative. So
Super creative.
linkedin.com/in/super creative. Yep.
Yeah, excellent. And thank you for being a repeat guest and for doing what to us is a quick half hour on diary studies. And of course, if you are watching this later on the YouTube and you have any comments or questions, leave a comment. Always answer them personally. And if it's something for David, I will track him down and get him to answer your YouTube comments. So thanks again to everybody for joining. Let me take a quick look at what's coming up on our calendar. And let's see, today is Monday. Tomorrow we have Q&A AMA at 6:30 p.m. Italy time. And Wednesday, we're going to be doing another webinar. I'm going to be reading my controversial article on a democratized job is easy for AI to take. Ouch, burning. If Rush develops, discontinue use. So that's what's going on this week. Thanks to the people who joined us live, and thanks again to Patreons, and thanks to David. And see everybody soon. Bye.